Welcome. And we're on to an exciting session because Madam Som, or Reba as she would like to be called, has had an exciting life. How many of you are jealous of someone who lives abroad year after year in very, very beautiful homes, meets all the glitterati and the important leaders across the world? How many of you are jealous? Only one, only two, only three. Oh my God, I am. Till I read this book. Till I read this book. But before I come to this book, let me tell you that this book is one of those very few books which are difficult to classify. Is it a travelogue? I said, yeah, this is a travelogue. I'm going to read about Dhaka, I'm going to read about Copenhagen, I'm going to read about Ottawa, I'm going to read about all these exotic Brazil. And then halfway through, I said, no, this is not a travelogue. This is a book of humor, because there are so many funny incidents in it. So this is humor, yes, this is a humorously written travelogue. I made up my mind, and then what happens? I suddenly find the whole thing is gone into a subversive mode. She's talking about the rights of women. She's talking a very feminist language where she says, so what if I am a wife? So what if I am a diplomat's wife? I am me. So we're going to let you talk now and tell me how in this, this book leaves you breathless. You feel you are traveling, making parties, throwing parties, arranging tables, meeting dignitaries. How in the middle of all this did you have time to store those memories away?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bangalore Lit Fest, for inviting me. This first time here in this lovely city. Thank you, Sathya, for being with me in discussion. It's been a long journey. And yes, I wear many hats, as you do, as many of us do. I think essentially I'm an academic. History has been my discipline. My books, as has been mentioned, have really been academic books in fulfillment of many fellowships, serious books on Nehru, Subhash Bose, Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Sister Nivedita. And then comes this book. This was the most fun book for me to write. And it all happened during the years of COVID, when we were all trapped in our homes. And I live in Greater Noida, where we have a lot of retired people from the Foreign Service. We are in an enclave. And there, sitting there, I found albums and albums. In those days, we actually stored photographs in albums, and we didn't have these gimmicky smartphones. So I drew out those albums, and to each photograph hung a tale. And I had actually kept all the letters. And those were inland letters sent by diplomatic bag. All those things are things of the past. And with each photograph or each letter came out a story. So as I said, it was really a fun book for me to write. Also, as Sathya mentions, I think we are a very misunderstood lot. Even in our families, they think, oh, but she's all hi-fi, and she's trotted the world and done great things. But not very many realize the angst, the tears that were left unshed when we traveled great distances. I remember going to Brazil for the first time. It was for me the first time on a plane. I was 22 years old, straight out of Presidency College, Calcutta, married to my husband, who was 3 years older than I. And we go across continents to Brazil at a time when there were no phone calls to be exchanged. We were dreadfully poor. He was third secretary, language probationer. And there was no internet. There was nothing. So you're cut off across distances. And I remember one of the things that I write about, and you talk about the humor, because now I think, yeah, it must have been quite funny. But when I felt very homesick, I just had to look around me. And what really pacified me were the cows. The cows had wonderful horns. And they looked much more handsome with lovely eyes. They looked much more handsome than the European cattle with bloodshot eyes, stocky cattle. And then I asked around and I was told they're called Gujara. They came from Gujarat. And it's really that which set me thinking about the Portuguese seafaring trade, how so many words are of Portuguese origin, which I found, how the mango is called manga da India. And then I felt, no, I'm not far away. I am actually at home. And this is the link that I found in almost all our postings, that you find the link and then you realize that the world is actually not that far away, that we're all close together.
But I would like a glimpse, I'd like to share, you to share a glimpse into your life. Behind the scenes, so to say, because you're never in front. It's always the diplomat who's there, greeting, meeting, making life-changing destinies of nations. So what was your life like in all these places behind the scenes?
I think we were the sheet anchor behind our husband's success, but we were unsung for. Nobody recognized us as much as we would like to, and that's a fact. And that is some of the angst that remained with us, and it was in 1998, I remember. We were back on a home posting, and I had done a stint with Unifem as a consultant, and I was all charged up with, as you say, with the woman's voice and need for the woman's voice to be expressed. And I remember going to, it was a party with the foreign minister had come and greeted the foreign service officers and their wives, and we were all standing, all decked up in our fineries. And the foreign minister went up to the podium and complimented the officers, saying that they were the creme de la creme. But there's not a whisper about the wives. And we all stood there as decorative pieces. And that's when I thought that something has to change. So I became the editor of a journal which we called, from the External Affairs Spousal Association, or ISA as it was called. So on a lark, I said, let's send out a questionnaire to all our missions abroad and see what responses we get. And the questionnaire was changing perceptions of the foreign service wife. My God, it was Pandora's box. And all that came out of it when everybody said that, we need to be heard. We are constantly making hundreds and hundreds of samosas and gulab jamuns, and without enough help, without necessarily having any experience, but nobody recognizes us. There should be some remuneration, if you will. All kinds of things happened. And then we formed a little group, and we said, okay, let's start right at the beginning and maybe make a little difference. A small difference maybe. We said, look, as heads of missions, wives are not allowed to work abroad. Blanket ban, even if you're professionally qualified. The other wives had been allowed, but heads of missions wives, no, a blanket ban. So we formed a little group, and we then mustered all our courage and went to the foreign secretary, who was a very amiable and a wonderful, erudite person. And we knew that he would understand surely. But he looked at us, smiled nicely, and said, no, it can't be done. And so we came back crestfallen. And you know what? The next foreign secretary was a lady officer. And immediately, she changed the rule. And you know what? The lady sitting right here was additional secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, Lata Reddy. It was under her signature that this great landmark decision was conveyed to us. Thank you, Lata.
Thank you. That's a lovely, lovely story. In fact, you preempted me because I was going to ask you what were the reactions. But I will ask you about another reaction. When all these stories were published and all these voices were heard, was there any response that was official? Or did they pretend it never happened?
The journal was tucked away in some shelf.
That's what happens when it hurts you, pretend it isn't there.
But since we had won, in a way, it didn't mean that all of us were going to go out and start working, no. But at least we felt that there was no blanket ban. I never worked as an ambassador's wife. I was writing my books, if you will, but that didn't matter. But the fact that somebody was holding you back didn't feel good at all, didn't feel right, because many of us were very qualified. And I think, I must say, that times have changed. And today the Foreign Service is much more, it's very different from our time. It's also the age of the social media, of the computer, communications are easy, and India has come of age. So our wives don't have to painstakingly make the gulab jamuns out of milk powder and devise ways of, making small eats with our small salaries. No, Indian restaurants have come of age. And so, but that is the story of the new age Foreign Service wife to tell.
So we can feel jealous of them. That they have an easy time.
No, ours was a very special time. And in fact, many of the stories come from the previous century. So I think it's also of archival interest. In fact, my publisher was so thrilled to publish a letter, an inland letter, which nobody knows about anymore, and how we used to, this whole business of diplomatic bag.
Incidentally, you used to get my magazine in the
Femina
diplomatic.
was something we all used to grab.
Well, I wanted to ask you to recount one incident which kind of made me very interested, is when you were in Canada and the Mounties would constantly be there with you. How did that feel and how did that come to be?
The Mounties were exceptional, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Today they are being heckled a bit for certain reasons, but I must say in our time, we found them the most educative experience of being in Canada. We were under protection because the Khalistan problem was very real, and the embassy was protected, and they would be with us all the time. But they were a very discreet lot, and they would be with us all the time wherever we went. And sometimes it could be a bit of a problem because they wouldn't leave us. And we all had code names. So my sons felt they were living in a James Bond kind of situation. And my younger son, who was in school, he used to feel very embarrassed because the bulletproof car would go to the school to fetch him. And he hated that because all the other kids would keep asking him that, are you the son of a Maharaja? And, and he would sort of run to the car before the Mounties could open the door for him. So there were all kinds of stories like that. But very interestingly, they gave us some very solid tips about hypothermia, for example, how people can really die in the sub-cold temperatures. And all you need is to keep a blanket and a candle in your car. And just that candle light can stave off hypothermia and all kinds of things like that.
No, but there's another lovely story about you and a colleague's wife going shopping. You must share that. That's very cute.
Yeah, two such stories actually. Once, of course, soon after going to Canada, I just decided that now is my time to go to one of these great malls and to buy some lingerie for myself. So there was me and my friend, and the two of us went in, not realizing, and we had actually sneaked out. We didn't tell the RCMP. So we just went on our own. And there we were looking at lingerie and sizes, cup sizes, if you will. And then there's this voice just behind me saying, ma'am, we are just behind you if you need us. And we dropped everything and ran. And another time I remember going to the school, Lisgar Collegiate, where my son, Vishnu, who many of you know as being with NDTV. So he was there, and he was in the final year of school, and we were discussing marks. I was very uncomfortable with these people behind me, so I had to request them, could you just be outside the door? But they were always a jolly lot.
Yeah, lovely stories. I'm going to take 2 minutes of your time to tell you that while I was reading this book, I had 4 moments of absolute shock. because our lives seem to have intersected remotely in some way. Once when you wrote about Khalili, Ambassador Khalili, because Sabah, his daughter, was my friend. And I broke the story of her mother's murder right here in Bangalore, in the press, in Femina.
Wow.
Yeah, and if you look at Dancing on the Grave, which is,
Yes, of course.
they have interviewed me there because I broke the story.
Okay.
Times was, of course, very, what was it called, unhelpful, and refused to let them show the magazine. But anyway, I got my 2 bits worth in. So that was one. The second time was when you mentioned Dulal Mukherjee,
Yes.
who built the building for the Rabindra Memorial.
Rabindranath Tagore Center,
Center in,
ICCR,
in Calcutta.
Yes.
Now, Dulal's wife and I studied together in college,
Okay.
in our MA class. So I
Okay.
said, here, this is like getting too small a world for me. And Shamlu Dudeja of the
course.
beautiful Kanta saris used to exhibit with us when we did our shows.
Okay.
And the last one was when your son was in Uttarakhand. I was trapped in Uttarakhand
My
too.
gosh.
He was in Pindari. We didn't go to Pindari that year. We went to Sundardunga. And the army had to come and rescue us. We were trapped there because all the bridges had gone through. So I
That's
said, this
right.
is like too close to home.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like coincidence. I think it
Yeah.
was meant to be that we are together.
Talking about meant to be, I want to ask you about, no, before that, I want to ask you about a little bit about even a family as like yours, which has lived abroad, knows the world closely, can have generational gap issues. Like when you come back to Delhi and you decide to go to a get video cassettes from a video parlor. Tell us that story. That's a really eye-opener about how generations can think differently.
Yeah, I think that, well, I did a kind of study for McGill University on the first and second generation Indo-Canadian woman. And that for me was a huge learning experience because here the mothers had come to Canada at a time as professionals, had taken up jobs and so on, and they were trying to mainstream themselves in their service environment. But at home, they were very Indian, were very traditional, with Indian food and habits and so on. But their children, who were the second generation, they were quite totally Canadian. They spoke Canadian without an accent, and they wanted to go in for dating and so on, which the parents wouldn't approve. They had interests which the parents didn't like, and so on. So there was this kind of conflict. Now, in our lives, in the Foreign Service family lives, we've had all kinds of tensions too, in the sense that our children, they've been plucked out of postings every 3 years. So whatever friends they've made in one country, they have to again start all over again. Then maybe it's a different system of education. Maybe it's a different language. And we were of that generation, we were not privileged to send our children to international schools. That came about later. So our children, both my boys, we had to send them to boarding schools, and both of them were disasters. Vishnu had to go to St. Paul's, Darjeeling, when there was a Gurkha agitation, and the school closed down. And Abhishek went to Doon School, where he didn't have very good luck with the seniors in the school, and that was another story. But all in all, and then of course, when you're abroad and the children are accustomed to that kind of a life, and then you come back to India, which is totally different, to try and fit in, and then you realize that the India that you've left is not the same as what you come back to. So that's another big challenge. So there's always been this back and forth. I remember one of the stories I remember is when after our posting in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and we came back home on a home posting, we stayed at Curzon Road apartments, with tiny apartments, with a one-room apartment. And that's where Vishnu he was only 3. And he loved it and started going to school and so on. And he was into nursery rhymes and Pussycat, Pussycat, where have you been? I've been to England to see the Queen or whatever. And there was this picture book. with this lovely house with lovely gates. And the next thing is we go to Islamabad with Vishnu, and those were those huge houses. And then I remember, I'll never forget this. So we went into the house, and the gate swung open, and little Vishnu comes and says, "Ma, is this Buckingham Palace?" So this juxtaposing all the time required a certain ability to adjust, which has actually stood them in good stead. And I think it's very important for us also to realize where we came from. And all this that we've had was all fun, but this is where we belong. And never to lose sight of that. That is for me very important. And I try very hard to remember that and to instill that in the boys.
We've got 5 minutes left, so I don't want to waste your time. I want to quickly talk about your music and how it has, I mean, you started learning Rabindra Sangeet at 5, and you continued to be an exponent of it, to become someone whom people enjoyed listening to, admired, and wanted to listen. You've done some amazing things with the music, but I want to talk about something very different, where you went to Dhaka and decided to learn Nazrul Geet. Tell us that little story. Would you read from the book for that?
Okay.
Because it's a very moving, it's a very, it's a beautiful passage.
The songs of Qazi Nazrul Islam had been a great favorite of my father's, and he would often hum the songs made famous in the golden voice of its legendary exponent, Firoza Begum. Since I had been trained from age 5 in Tagore songs, which had a distinctly different style of rendition from Nazrul's music, I realized I could never aspire to learn these with any success. However, a chance encounter with Firoza Begum at a small dinner revived my dormant longing. Elegantly attired in a beautiful white Dhaka sari, Firoza Begum, with a dimpled smile and regal bearing, sat in the corner of the room. As I paid my compliments to her, I realized she was aware that I had been singing at various public functions in the city. However, when I plucked up courage and asked her if she could teach me Nazrul Giti, she was blunt. She said that, well, since we were well into our time-bound posting, there wouldn't be enough time for me to absorb a musical genre distinct from Rabindra Sangeet I had been singing. I persisted. She invited me to her flat, where she could hear me sing a few songs. "Bring your own harmonium," she said. And it sank in there that this was to be a test. A few days later, I mounted 3 flights of steps, harmonium perched on my driver's shoulders. I entered her flat with apprehension. There were fresh flowers on her table and a mild whiff of incense. At her bidding, I sang, one after another, 4 songs of Tagore. She heard me without any comment till at the end, when she broke her silence and asked, why had I not been singing for Bangladesh television? My relief was palpable. I had passed her test. She said she would teach me only 1 song, which she would like to hear from me after a week, and then judge whether she could take me on as a student, since she had closed down her music school. She wouldn't like to waste her time, nor mine. I came away with the haunting notes of the song Shawano Rate Judi ringing in my ears. The next week was spent singing the song morning, noon, and night, desperately trying to remember the inflection and modulation she had placed on the words. When she finally heard me, her reticent face thawed into a warm smile. Yes, she would take me on. It was a moment of euphoria for me. Over the next 2 years, my weekly classes with her extended well beyond the music lesson to serious discussions on life itself, the meaning of religion, her own journey into music as a 10-year-old when she had sung before Nazrul and surprised all with her talent, how she became a child artist and music eventually became her savior and escape when she went away to Calcutta, training to be an All India radio artist under the famous composer Kamal Das Gupta, 20 years her senior, whom she loved and married, bringing him over to Dhaka at his old age, where he died and lies buried. Recognized as National Artist of Bangladesh, Firoza remained a private person immersed in music. What began as a Guru-Shishya relationship transcended to a deep friendship as Firoza Di declined any remuneration, saying her musical hours with me gave her as much joy as they gave me. She dearly wished that I should cut a disc and tried her best to make it happen. But the exigencies of our life, with sudden postings and transfers, made it impossible. For me, knowing her and learning for her had already been my cherished gift. The dream of making a recording was to come true many years later.
Beautiful, beautifully written. Beautiful.
Yeah, but I might just add a little bit of how that happened.
Yes.
Many years, 20 years later, I was in Kolkata. I was the founder director of ICCR's flagship Rabindranath Tagore Center in Kolkata. When one day I was sitting in my office and this gentleman comes in, he was a music director of great repute, Debojyoti Mishra, who's given his scores to many films. So Debojyoti came in and we started chatting. He'd come to book the auditorium for some program. So we chatted and I recounted the story with Firoza Begum and he was very interested. So he said that he'd heard my Tagore CD, but he had no idea that I also sang Nazrul. So he said, I'm going to come to your house and hear you. And it so happened that his house was just one lane away from mine, again, serendipity. So he walked in and I sang for him. And suddenly he said, when I close my eyes, I can hear Firoza Begum. Because I had absorbed those modulations so intrinsically, I'd never learned Nazrul Giti after I left Dhaka. So I was stuck with that in my head. So he took me to a recording studio and he said, you just sing those 12 songs, just the way you sang for me with your harmonium and nothing more. So I sang the songs all in one take and I forgot all about them. And I came away to Delhi and in 2013 and so many things happened in my life and I finished with my Kolkata chapter. But when I went back on a visit, there was Debojyoti telling me, what happened? You never came back? It's waiting for you. I said, what is? He said, I put music into those songs. And now it's going to be an album with Times music. And wow, and that's exactly what happened. So it's on Ghana.com, it's on Spotify.
I'm going to say that serendipity indeed, because your story with Firoza reminds me of my story of Hari Prasad Chaurasia wooing Annapurna Devi for 3 years, saying, please take me as a student, going to her house every week, every fortnight, and her not looking at him till she finally took him and made him her best student. So thank you. Can we take a minute? I want her to sing 2 lines. 2 lines we need you to hear. I want to hear that voice, please. Thank you.
That's difficult because right now, without rehearsal, but my book, I end with a song from Tagore, which kind of reflects the mood I'm in now, right now. This is the first song of Gitanjali, the Nobel Prize-winning collection of song poems that Tagore had himself translated into English from his own songs in Bangla. And he said, huh? Will you throw us out?
They might, I would really like to hear you right now. Those have become public enemy number 1.
Okay, so, no, but I have to say this little bit. Otherwise, how would they know if I sing in Bangla what it means? It says that this is my delight, to wait and watch at the wayside where shadow chases light and rain comes in the wake of summer. Amare path chawate anondo, amare path chawate anondo, খেলে যায় রৌদ্র ছায়া, বর্ষায় আসে বসন্ত, ও আমার এই পথ চলাতেই আনন্দ। কারায়ে সম্মুখ দিয়ে আসে যায় খবর নিয়ে, কারায়ে সম্মুখ দিয়ে আসে যায় খবর নিয়ে, খুশির ওই আপন মনে বাতাস বহে, বাতাস বহে সুমন্দ, ও আমার এই পথ চাওয়াতে আনন্দ।